All right, guys, so today we're going to talk about two ways of using SVG images as a dynamic data, so a dynamic field which renders to an SVG in the front end. There's multiple ways you can do this. I'm going to show you two ways, which is one is using it as an image source, and the other one is actually the SVG code. And there's pros and cons to both. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those. The first thing we have to do is make sure we've got a usable SVG image. So I'm going to quickly run through that first. So in Adobe Illustrator, I've got a file here I've downloaded from Envato Elements with a bunch of little bird icons. I'm just going to pick one of the icons that probably has the least colors in there so that we can zip through this. I think it's probably this little red one here. So I'm going to copy that one. And I'm going to do a new artboard in Illustrator, and 800 by 800 should be okay. What you want to do is make sure that your artboard size is larger than the largest size you're going to display this SVG at. I know Firefox used to have an issue, I'm not sure if it still does, where when you scale your SVG beyond the view box, it doesn't scale properly. It starts to scale the background and just center the SVG within that background. Just a poor implementation. So what we're going to do is make sure that it's bigger than the maximum size you're going to show it at, and then it will scale down properly anyway. So let's do 800 by 800. I'm going to paste my little bird into there, and basically I'm going to use my shift key on a PC, and I'm just going to drag and drop these until I get to the edge. And just we want to make sure that we're using our snapping. Okay, I'm going to get my bird here. I'm going to align him to the top of the page, and then I'm going to use my artboard tool. I'm going to grab the bottom of that. I'm going to snap to the lowest point there. So we've got an artboard which is exactly the size of our SVG image here. And if we look at the artboard here, you see in points, it's going to change that to pixels. So it is in pixels. For some reason, they're just odd numbers. Okay, so what I might do, because odd numbers just don't work. So I'm going to set the width to 799. I'm being a little bit particular here. And we'll make that 643, 644. Okay, so we're just changing our artboard to fit within that. I'm just going to then grab my image again. And actually, that was the image. Where's the artboard? 800 by 643. And when we select our image, it's 800 by 7. Let's just make that 800. Sometimes the snapping doesn't work as well as we want it to, so that make that 643. So it's the same as the image, and we're just going to make that image left and top, so that's just aligned perfectly. So the last point on all of our edges here is aligned with our artboard. Okay, now we have a perfect artboard. I'm just going to click and make sure there's no white around there. So if I click around this bird, there's no white around it, so it's going to be transparent. Okay, so that's the artboard prepared in Illustrator. Now we want to save this bird. So we go File, Save As. We're going to save it as a SVG. Sorry, my external drive is slowing things down a little bit here. So I'm going to save as an SVG in my downloads. I'm going to call this bird red, and we'll just make it AI so I know it came from Adobe Illustrator. Okay, and make sure we got SVG selected. Save that. Okay, we get our dialog come up. We want to make sure in Illustrator we're using style elements, so we get classes. And we want to make sure responsive is checked, so it uses a view box rather than a width and a height, which we're going to actually pass this through SVG OMG anyway. But once we've done that, we hit the OK to save it. Then let's have a look at our bird. So now downloads here. There's our bird red. And there's our Adobe Illustrator exported SVG for that bird. Now we need to, we've got quite a few colors here. There's more than I expected. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open this bird up that I've just created in Notepad++. I'm using a PC. I think Notepad++ will work on Macs as well. Excuse me, guys. I've got a bit of a cold that I'm getting over here. So whatever you use, as long as you can search and replace. So I'm going to use Notepad++. Open this bird up. And what I'm going to do is all these stroke classes that Adobe Illustrator created, I'm going to rename those so that we can work with them a little bit easier. So I'm going to copy that ST0. I'm going to do a Control A to select all, Control F for my search, Control V to put my ST0 in there. We're going to use the replace function. I'm going to call this SVG color 0. So ST0, we're just going to rename to SVG with the element color 0. So we're going to break this up into its segments that make sense to us. So I'm going to replace all there. Now I'm going to have to go through and do all of these. I didn't realize there's so many colors with this. One, replace all. Okay, so that's all of our class names renamed. Just quickly look through and make sure that I haven't missed anything in the actual code. That all looks good. So I'm going to hit the save this. Now I'm going to open up SVG OMG. And I'm going to paste all of this code here, Control A, Control C, paste the markup into there. And there's my bird with all the class names all changed. Now, the important things in SVG OMG we want to do is we want to remove with our remove view box. So we don't want the view box size there at all, just in case we haven't gone right to our edges. We then want to tell it to prefer view box to width and height. So if you have got a width and height on your SVG, it's going to remove that and then turn that into a view box of the actual size of the SVG. Width and height will restrict how your SVG scales in different browsers. It behaves differently. So you don't want a width and a height on your SVG. You want a view box which makes it responsive. Okay, so there it is there. And we're going to hit the download. And we're going to call this one bird. Where's our bird red? Bird red AI. And I'm just going to put a suffix on that of SVG OMG. So we know that we've passed it through, actually we don't need a dash there, SVG OMG. So we know we've come from Illustrator and then we've passed it through SVG OMG. Save that. And we've got our file prepared now. So we've gone from picking a bird in Illustrator, making a nice big artboard for it. We started with 800 by 800, put our bird on there, went to the limits on that, resized our artboard so that it just covers that bird. And then we've saved that as an SVG using element styles so that we've got classes. We've then gone into Notepad++ and just renamed all of those styles to something that makes more sense for us when we're going to style this up. You can leave them as ST0, ST1, ST2. If you've got multiples of these on multiple SVGs with the same class names, you need to be very careful about how you target them for your styling. Because one will override the other. So that's why we're going to rename those. All right, so that's the preparation of that done. Now let's go to how we're going to use this in WordPress. Here's our WordPress dashboard. So as I said, we're going to use this as dynamic data. So the first thing we do, I'm using Metabox. We've created a post type here of SVG test, and in my SVG test, I'm not going to go through all the post type settings here. I'm using Metabox, I should say. The only thing I've done is given it a name, and in the supports, I've just unchecked everything except for title. And that's all I've done there. And then in the custom fields, what I've done here, my SVG tests, I've added in my settings, I've told it that the post type is for my SVG test post type that I've just created. In my fields, I have a single image called SVG image, and I have a text area called SVG text area. And in my advanced tab for SVG text area, I've got my custom sanitize callback set to none. And I'll explain why I do that later. This is important. I'll explain why I do that later and some of the pros and cons and downsides once we've got this set up. Okay, so there is our setup ready to go. So let's create our first SVG test here. So I'm going to add a new, and we're going to call this bird red. And we're going to use so here's our first custom field from Metabox, which is our single image. We're going to add the meta for that. And let's get rid of this one. I'll say test one I was playing with. There's a real weird bug with SVG OMG, with Metabox, where it shows you the SVGs on the first run, but it won't show you them afterwards. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So first of all, I'm going to grab my downloads. Where's my bird red? There you go. There's the one we just passed through SVG OMG. I'm just going to drag that into there. So there's our bird as a single image. We'll select that. Now see how that worked, and we actually can see the image there. Now here's the bug with Metabox. When you click on this now, it doesn't show the SVGs. So the first time you click on it, you can select and you can see the SVGs. The second time, once you've already done it, you can't see them. Now, even if I hit save here, so I hit publish, come on, and I hit publish on that, and then maybe even just do a refresh just to be sure to show you. If I click on that, no SVGs are shown. It shows 11 of 12 media items. So what if I get rid of that and then hit add media? Now it shows me the SVG. So it's really weird. If I've got multiple SVGs in here, once I select one here, it won't show me the SVGs anymore. Okay, so that's the single image. And now we want to actually put the SVG code into this text area. So I'm going to go back to my Notepad++, do Control A. Actually, we don't want that. We want the one we passed through, this bird red. So we're going to grab that code there, which is the one we passed through SVG, Control A, Control C, back to here, and we're going to add that into this. So that's the actual SVG code. Update. Okay, and if I now look in here, we can see that we've got our SVG code there, which is the same code for that bird as we've done as a SVG background. Now I'm going to show you why we have to sanitize the callback as none. So if I go back to my Metabox and custom fields, and back to my SVG tests, and for my text area, if I take this none off the sanitize callback, watch what happens when I save this. If I hit update, we've lost all of our SVG code. All we've got in there is the styles that were within that SVG. And the reason for that is by default, WordPress will strip out all of the SVG tags. Now, the reason for that is because of security. So SVG is an XML format, which can include JavaScript, and it also can include iframes, which means that if your SVG came from a source that you didn't create, or you don't know where it came from, you've just downloaded it from somewhere, there is a risk that it could contain malicious code as JavaScript or iframes. So it automatically strips out the SVG code, which means it's unusable. So what we have to do is in Metabox or ACF, what are you using? We have to tell it to not sanitize. In Metabox, you just add none to the sanitize callback, and it doesn't do any sanitization whatsoever. Now, what we can do now is paste our SVG code back into there, hit update, and the SVG code is all there. So that's just an important thing. Now, so that's the only real, for me, the only real con of doing the SVG as plain text in a text area is the fact that you have to make sure that there's no malicious code in that SVG, because there's no sanitization happening when you save that. Anyway, that said, that's your risk, but I think it's an okay one if you're the one who's creating and uploading those SVGs. So there's our one custom post for SVG test. Now we've got to look at how we display that in bricks. So let's have a look at our builder. I'm just going to refresh this page. Now we've got other stuff we've done. Okay, now I'm just going to create a section, and in that section I'm just going to put a block in there, and that block I'm going to turn that into a query loop, and we're going to select our post type of SVG tests. Okay, just going to put in the title, so the post title will be just the dynamic data for the post title. Can't see it because of a black background, so I'll just give it a bit of color there. Okay, now I'm going to put a block underneath that. So I'm going to show you the SVG in two different ways. So in that block there, I'm going to make it a grid. Put some gap on there. For ACSS users, you'll see these are ACSS variables. What am I doing? Grid. A grid of 2. So we've got 2 blocks there. And my first one, I'm going to just put an image in there. I'm also using some advanced SEMA shortcuts here. If you don't have those, you need to insert them from using the standard bricks editor. In this image, all I'm going to do is select my image as dynamic data. I'm going to put in image. And down at the bottom here, I can see my SVG test Metabox SVG image, which is my single image. And there's my background, and there's my bird as a image. Okay, so the next one I'm going to do is by the way, I'm just going to show you here, you can actually use a SVG element, but unfortunately there is no dynamic data setting on that. You've actually got to select the file from a URL. And I don't even use this, so I'm not even sure how that renders, whether it actually renders as an SVG or it renders as an image. I'm not really sure, but we can't use that because there's no provision for dynamic data. So let's get rid of that. So what we're going to use instead is a code element. In the code element, we're going to allow it to execute the code. We're going to leave the wrapper on there, so we're not going to tell it to render without wrapper because we're going to need that for our styling. And what we're going to do is come back to our field group here in Metabox, and with Metabox, and I'm sure ACF is the same, I don't use it, but if we look at our text area here, which has got our SVG, there's a bit of demo code here for displaying the value. So I'm just going to copy that back to my editor, and I'm going to paste that in there, and there is my bird again. So that there is getting so this code block is getting this SVG text area. The image is just using a source as the background. So let's just save this and have a look. Okay. So if we have a look at the DOM, look at our first bird. It is a single image with an SVG background. Okay, nice and simple, works exactly as you'd expect it to. The next bird is actually the SVG code for that image. And you'll notice that as we use our inspector, we can actually roll over segments of this because it's an SVG, not a background image. Okay, no, sorry, not an image, SVG rendered as an image in the background here. Now, this is an important distinction because of the control that you have over this. So what I'm going to do is look at the color value. So let's, for example, this red head here. We want to change that, and we click on that. So use our inspector, click on that red head there, and we can see that that is our SVG color 5. Now, this is one of the reasons we rename those styles so they make sense when we're trying to look at it in the DOM and when we're naming these things. So you can see that that's got a stroke and a fill. Okay, so let's look at that fill. And we're going to make that maybe this sort of color here. Actually, the stroke I don't think is even being used on there. It's not. Or is it? Oh, it is. There's actually just a very slight stroke on there. That's okay. We're not going to worry about that stroke. So you can see we just made the head blue on that one. So I'm going to grab that rule, copy the rule, and come back to our builder. And on this code block, now if I go to the Style tab, CSS, target from the root, because we want to make sure we're very specific about which SVG element we're actually styling. From the root, we're going to go SVG color. Oops, too many of those. SVG color 5 is going to be that blue color. Okay. Let's pick another one. Let's go back to our builder, and let's say we want the wing there. So that's SVG color 7, and we want the stroke on that to be, sorry, not the stroke, we're not using stroke, we want the, there we go, SVG color 7's there. So we want that to be this sort of color there, coloring up our bird. So we're going to copy that, copy the rule, back to our builder, that, and paste that there. So now we've colored the crest and we covered the wing and that segment there, because obviously they were the same color when we exported from Illustrator, so they have the same class name. So there we go. So in the editor, we can edit these values based on those classes. Now, remembering that SVG there is exactly the same as this SVG here. However, if we copy that and go to this SVG, which is an image, and we paste that in there, nothing changes. So we can't edit the SVG by targeting the styles of it when we use it as a image source. So the downside of using it as an image source is that it is what it is. The colors are what they are when the SVG is created. You can't manipulate those in Bricks or any page editor at all. It is just a background image. Okay. When you use the actual code, where you got the SVG code outputting, we can actually target those classes and we can actually change the color. So I'm going to do one more, which is going to be on the, let's pick this other wing here. I'm going to show you something else we can do with this. Let's just save that because it's actually updated our editor. There we go. So I'm going to pick maybe this part of the wing. So that's SVG color 9. Okay. On that one there, I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go to my root again. SVG color 9. Oops. What we're going to say is when we hover, I want SVG color 9 to be fill of green. Okay, so there we go. It's actually the same color as the head, so that's actually going to cover the whole lot. Okay, just quickly coming back to this, I had to pause or stop the video. I was having some trouble with the advanced themers, supercharged CSS, messing up my rules as I was typing them. But as it is at the moment, so I've got here this bird. So I'm targeting SVG color 1. I'm setting the color on it. I'm then targeting it again when the root is hovered. It's changing the fill and transforming it, which would be the beak up here. And as you can see from the front end, yeah, you can see that it's all editable. So the single image using a source for your SVG as the background is not editable. Using an SVG code, you can target each of those segments of color, and you can target those, and you watch the beak move here. You know, you got this green translating by Y, changing color. We've changed the color of the crest. So there's some benefits to doing it this way. And we'll leave it at that, and we'll hopefully you'll get some value out of this.